Greetings, fellow quitters, and welcome back to the Command Q podcast. We're your hosts. I'm Maari Casey.
And I'm John Pelfrey.
One of the most challenging things about freelancing is the total absence of an HR department. If you're someone who really dreads conflict, the lack of a professional buffer can make it really challenging to have those tough conversations and set boundaries. It may never really feel easy, but today we're talking about how to make it feel a little bit easier.
Yeah, and a bit later, we've got a very special guest stopping by to chat with us today on the podcast. Brand master, author, and Maari's former boss, David Baldwin, joining us to offer some perspective on how to manage our relationships with clients and colleagues and stop letting avoidance dictate our moves. All right, Maari, so warm-up question here. Have you ever gone to extreme lengths to avoid conflict?
Yeah, I tend to try. I feel like especially early in my career, I did a little bit of caveating my way around things that I saw were coming, or be like, hey, I think this is a really great idea. Like, you're so smart, knowing that I wanted to challenge something in the future. So kind of planting those little nuggets of we're buddies here. Everything's all good, best friends. So that when there was a challenge, it wasn't as much as me coming aggressively at them. I think personally too, I avoid conflict by trying to either manipulate the situation before it gets to a conflict point, or again, trying to have them hopefully get them to come to my idea before we have to have a conflict around it. But on the flip side, I also don't mind conflict as I've gotten older. I kind of like the challenge of it. So it depends a lot of times on who I'm talking to and what kind of relationship we have going into that conversation.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's the biggest part is the who you're talking to and what kind of relationship you have with them. And then that kind of sets the bar for the amount of conflict, you're willing to go through. For instance, an acquaintance, I probably wouldn't put much effort into going into conflict with somebody about something small that doesn't really matter to me very much, because people move in and out of your life, and that's just kind of the way that it rolls. And so there's no reason to put a lot of energy into something that's not going to give you much back. Whereas, let's say a relationship with my wife, been in a relationship with since 1996, we've definitely gone through conflicts and challenges and issues or whatever, but it's totally worth it to put in the effort to solve a problem about our relationship, because she's someone I love and intend to spend the rest of my life with. And so I'm going to put a lot of energy into that, and then I think everything else falls somewhere between those two in the spectrum of when it comes to avoiding conflict, I have really never been one to try to avoid it. In fact, when I was younger, I would say I probably sought out conflict more than to avoid it, because I thought that was part of what it meant to be a grown-up. Weird sort of way. It was you'd see rooms or whatever talking and, everybody being smarter than the next person. And so it seemed like the idea on television and through other things was the more conflict you have, the more people will respect you. I grew and learned from that as I got older, I think. But sometimes when you don't know what you're doing and you're inexperienced, you think this is, when I see people in a movie yelling and screaming at each other, you think that's the way people work. Okay, well then that's the way I need to. You don't realize that that's just an overly dramatized version of things. So I think when I was younger, I sought out conflict because I thought that was a way for me to prove myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned quickly that wasn't necessarily a benefit. And then I realized that my ability to walk into a room and admit when I'd screwed up and I was wrong and kind of embrace the conflict, or if the company was wrong or we made a promise that we couldn't deliver on because the sales guy lied or whatever, all of those things, my ability to handle that was actually a strength. And so I could walk into a room and say yeah, okay, there's a conflict here. This side believes that, I believes that, and then we're going to sit down and try to work that stuff out. And so what was a weakness, as I got smarter about it, became a strength because I wasn't really afraid to deal with it. I just saw it as these are challenges, these are problems in communication, and we can work it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like it's also the idea, I think, when you're young, a lot of times is conflict is a battle. This versus this.
Right.
Explosions. And I think I've realized that if you go into a situation where it's this is a conflict, it's a battle, it's us versus them, then your outcomes tend to be negative, or they tend to be all or nothing. All right, I quit, you're fired, you said this, I said that. And I think it's as I've gotten older, and also I've been married for 18 years, it's when my husband and I might have a conflict, or it's more we're going to get through this and we're going to be together at the other side of this conversation. So it's less about a conflict of us versus me versus him. It's more about, it's a conversation. We're both bringing points to the table. And I think it's like, as you get older, you realize that most of the situations, if you say conflicts feel like us versus them, it's more about approaching it as a conversation. If you want to maintain future with that colleague or spouse or relationship, I think it's just going in and presenting. And sometimes you'll say like conversations like we're not going to get anywhere, and I don't agree with where we're going, and maybe the relationship ends or it transitions. But I always think it's like conflict feels such like a battlefront, like it feels like a conflict versus a conversation, which most of the times they're just a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think in our current culture today, there seems to be this perspective of like everything is a zero sum game, right? If I
Mm-hmm.
win, you have to lose. If you lose, I win.
Right.
Right. And everything is put in that very black and white sort of like whoever has the most points at the end of the game, they're the winner, and then the other person's the loser. And so then that means that like if we're negotiating, let's say on the price of something that we want, the idea then would be that in order for me to win, I have to get the price that I have in my head before I start the negotiation. And then that means that you lost. And in reality, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, that's not a negotiation. That's just me saying, like, I'm going to give you $5,000 for this car, take it or leave it. And I'm walking away. That's not a negotiation. That's just you saying you won or lost. And then that creates all kinds of other challenges because if everything is just sort of that simple and that black and white, then you end up having to bully your way through things in order to get there. And then that
Mm-hmm.
bridges and then, and a bunch of other stuff. And so, the idea of like the zero sum game thing, I think is one of those things that it messes people up a lot. They think that it's like an all or nothing, I win, you lose, whatever. And to me, the best conversation, the best conflict resolutions that I've ever had are places where usually most people walk away feeling like they gained a little bit and they lost a little bit, but we
Mm-hmm.
live with it because it's going to be better than what we both had when we started. Like I used to have back in the days when I sold vacuum cleaners door to door in college, one of the guys that I worked with, he would always say, a slice of bread is better than no bread at all. And that was like, I think that sums it up, right?
Yeah.
That's a good one.
As long as you're not gluten free, and then it's terrible. Bad idea.
Right. But that one plays in my head all the time when I'm thinking about conflict or, negotiation or whatever. Is like, a slice of bread is better than no bread at all.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that's the way I tend to approach conflicts. There's certainly been times when I've been angry and upset where I didn't do that. And then I went back later and apologized and said I was sorry and was being an idiot, definitely that kind of thing. But I try to think of that, from the perspective of like, we're going to walk away from this with hopefully with a better situation than either one of us had at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. So, what do you think are some common sources of friction when people first start working? We talked about this. We alluded to this earlier. Like me, it was this idea that like I felt like I had to prove myself. I don't know if that was like my idea of
Mm-hmm.
a man was or being an adult was or something. What about you?
Yeah. Well, obviously, we're going to talk to David, and David was my first like real boss. So he saw me at my fragile beginning stages of working. But I think you're right. I think it's a lot about, you feel a little insecure because you're new and you're new to working. And so you're trying to prove yourself. You're trying to be like, yes, I can do this. You're trying to prove it to the outside world. You're also trying to prove it to yourself. And so that it's, any kind of insecurity can bring out sometimes the worst in us. Like you already mentioned this, but if somebody has a successful, like in my case in advertising, if there's a team that sold an idea and ours didn't sell through, like they were successful, I failed. Versus like, let me just celebrate their success because next time it's going to be my turn. Or even if it was a team that wasn't directly affected me, but they had a success, I felt threatened because now like they're one click up on the leaderboard. So I definitely think part of starting out and starting it with work is that need to prove who you are. And so people do that through any number of things, whether it's like, challenging somebody, where it's cutting somebody off, where it's, stealing an idea, where it's, speaking out against somebody, gossiping, those kind of things. And those just tend to be the toxic parts of work that I think are really, really damaging. And a lot of times it happens with people who are just younger or feel threatened or feel insecure.
Do you think those things are similar to when you're first starting out with your own business, when you're starting freelance, like you go from your working world into freelance? Do you feel like
Mm-hmm.
kind of insecurities and issues pop up, or are they different?
I definitely think when you're starting out with freelancing, because that brings back that insecurity. And it's like, now I'm saying I'm a freelancer. Can I really do this? I'm not sure. And then usually what you'll see is you will see freelancers having more difficult conflicts with clients where it's like, okay, well, we signed a contract and I said 3 rounds of revision, but now you're asking for a fourth. And there's a little bit of like, you feel like they're doing you an injustice versus like, it's just part of the contract. We got to talk through it. It's no big deal. It's not like they're trying to slight you or prove that you can't do it. We do tend to add a lot of emotion when we're doing something for the first time. And so it can happen with clients where, they give you feedback and it makes it tings a little bit of that insecurity. Like, oh, well, I thought it was going to be a little bit further along, or I thought maybe you would do something different than what I've seen before, whatever it is. And however it's projected to you, like we could take that and then all of a sudden reflect that back in a negative way versus trying to like disarm the situation and think through like, what are they really giving me? And like, I'm doing this, it's okay. And I think for freelancers, when they're starting out working with other freelancers too, there's that scarcity mentality where it's like you might see a freelancer at a coffee shop and you're like, I just started a job with such and such company, and you don't really want to tell them much about it. You don't want to share because you're afraid they're going to steal your client. And we all know that there's a ton of work out there and that's usually silly. But when you're starting out, you're really afraid. You're afraid to say the wrong thing. You're afraid to like lose business. You're afraid to be basically for all the outside world to prove what your little inside self is saying, which is like, I can't do it. I'm not going to be able to be successful. So yeah, I think that it's different in a lot of ways, but similar in the fact that it is all kind of coming back to like insecurity and starting to do something for the first time.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, a lot of it's based in fear of failure, fear of, not being able to pay your bills, fear of, other people maybe looking at you and saying like, oh, you screwed up. I remember when I started my first business, everybody in the world was like, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it.
Yeah.
And I was like, in my mind, I thought I'm just gonna, to me, I had no choice. This is what I needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't operate necessarily from a place of fear or even a place of like, I'm going to prove you wrong. It was more of, I looked at it as they're coming to me from a caring place where they don't want to see me or my family starve or, lose our home or whatever. And I try to think of it as like they're trying to support me, but their way of supporting me was to say, stick with what you know right now, like
Mm-hmm.
the devil sort of thing. And in my mind, it was like, that's no way for me to grow or to get better or to
Yeah.
improve my skills, my knowledge, my life, my, work-life balance, any of those sorts of things. But of course, most of the people that are out there they don't live in your head and they don't know what you are feeling or what your true desires are or goals for your life. For me, that was the part of it was like, there was that conflict between, I knew that they were saying it out of love, but at the same time, a little bit of fear. And then I had my own
Mm-hmm.
my own fears, which was I had a 1-year-old, child, and I had a mortgage and had bills to pay and everything else, and I didn't want to lose that. What if we got sick? All those types of things. And so those were the fears that I had. Were much more like in the home fears
Mm-hmm.
in that way. But it all definitely came from, a fear of failure of some sort. I think that's pretty normal and pretty natural. But like you said, there's a lot of things that we do where we assume that other people are looking at us and judging us, and
Mm-hmm.
they're not. It's just our own
Right.
voice. Like you said, our own inner voice is saying they're judging me. But in reality, like they're just doing their own thing and they're trying to get by on their own terms and with their own stuff.
Yeah.
And I really try to look at it as if somebody comes to me and says, John, I'm worried about you. They are worried about me because they care for me. Not because
Mm-hmm.
they're judging me, but it is so hard sometimes.
It's true.
You're at that.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's like, we're talking today about quit fearing conflict. And I think a lot of it, and up to now, I've been thinking like conflict as external, but we also really have a lot of internal conflict within ourselves. And we really have to learn to not be afraid of the conflict that we have internally, because usually it's uncovering a fear or something that we have to push through. And so we really shouldn't be afraid of when we feel that internal conflict of like, should I do this? Should I do this? Are they right? Am I wrong? Whatever. Because it's really uncovering something that's like, we need to work on that, or we need to pay attention to why that's bugging us. Because a lot of times it's like, if you can uncover, what that conflict is internally, then it's something that you can push past. And then it's like, okay, I no longer am afraid of this. I'm no longer afraid to start a freelance business because I've pushed through that fear. I found success in it. That's obviously, we're talking a lot about external conflict today, but there's also, when you uncover that internal conflict, you're like, okay, I noticed that, like, you shouldn't be afraid of, you should actually really like lean into it and pay attention to what it is kind of pointing back towards.
Yeah. And as we go that direction, how do we get past this idea of like taking things personally? Like, let's say, this example is, client comes back and gives you feedback on your work, and that feedback is littered with red pens and, markups and whatever.
Yeah.
How do you get past that step?
That's like super hard, especially in the creative world. I think this is something when you're younger and you have hope and light in your heart before it's just noticed or it's destroyed. No. When you enter, like when you come out of a creative school or even when you're switching jobs, a lot of what we do as creatives is very personal because it's like we're pulling our ideas and our solutions from a source of creative energy, which is like a personal source. And so when someone, craps all over your ideas or red pens it, it's hard not to take it personally. But I also think like the sooner you can realize to let some of that stuff go and know that you have an endless source of those ideas, the better you'll be. Because what happens is a lot of times is when you're kind of taking everything super personally is it starts to come out in other ways. So it's like if a client gives you a red pen lined up copy doc, then maybe you don't say anything and you just kind of silently do it. But since you haven't dealt with that, it's going to come out by like you're going to be snarky towards them or you're going to ignore a few emails because like you're trying to teach them a lesson for like they don't know that you're doing this, but we all do that inherently in other ways. So as soon as you feel like that, again, a conflict, like, oh, they marked up my copy. Like, don't they understand that I'm the greatest writer of all time and they're just really dumb and how dare they? But then that's like, you need to pay attention to that and solve for that because otherwise it is going to come out in other ways that are going to destroy that relationship. And so it's like the sooner you kind of pay attention to that, the better. And as a creative, it's like you have to do that because your product is the work you're putting out there. So even though it is personal to you, you care about the work you do, you have to like learn a level of detachment from what you're putting out there to be able to survive, in my opinion.
Right. Absolutely. And I think a lot of that type of conflict, it starts early in the process. Most of it comes from a misalignment of goals or what success looks like. And if you don't agree on that or understand what the client looking for and they view as success, then it's really hard to hit that mark. It's much easier if you're aligned and you're judging their feedback through the lens of, well, I understand what success looks like for them, and oh, you're right. We need to change this phrase, or we need to alter this, or whatever, because that helps us get to success better.
Yes.
If you can frame it in that way in your mind, the idea itself. I had another friend, and he told me once, he's like, ideas are like they're a dime a dozen. Ideas are not unique or special or anything. What is special is the work product that you create, and that work that result, which starts with an idea, the result of that work product is really the thing that you're aiming for. And that comes through working with other people in a collaborative way to get to the work product. It's not your work product in the end, it's ours. It's mine and the clients together to get that success metric that we're looking for at the end. And if we achieve that, then who cares whose idea it was or how many hours we put into it or what the thing was. If we nailed it and we all have success, then great. Client's going to come to me again next time. And then it's going to be a bigger project. And maybe in a year, they're willing to pay me more money per hour. We're building a relationship in that way instead of looking at it as like a one-off little, like, well, they slighted me on this one thing because they don't understand my genius. Well, your genius might not align with their, company goals. So make sure you've got that worked out first. Yeah. So has your approach to conflict changed over time as you've, obviously it has. You've gotten older and more experienced and smarter and stuff.
I'm tired.
Yeah, tired.
Yeah, I think like when I was the younger version of myself, like I was still really coming out of the mentality. I think also just being an athlete was, like I win, you lose, I win. And advertising definitely feeds into that. So it was a great business for me to get into. But it's emotionally exhausting because you're like, you're all like, oh, I'm down today, I'm up today, I'm down today, I'm up today. And I think as I've gotten older, I've realized that it's more about the relationships and how long I want to be in those relationships. And again, it's like conversation versus a conflict. Yes, do I disagree on certain things? I do a much better time now evaluating if I even need to care about this situation that I disagree with. Like you said, like sometimes things are just like, okay, I can let that go. Like I'll let them have that win. Like they want it to be red. Like it's not a good color, but not going to kill the world. Let's go for it. I don't try to go after and I don't fall on every single sword like I used to. And then I think most of the times when I am disagreeing with something, it's like, this is just a conversation we're going to have. And I approach it much more like that. And I try to understand and think a little bit more empathetically about the other side of the table, which I didn't do as much when I was younger, because now I've been on both sides. And I think that's a much better way to approach a conversation is look at it from every single angle before you start having that, that conflict conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you and I sit in a unique position, I feel like, in the middle a lot between the freelancer and the creative work and the client and their desired business outcome. You certainly moderate and mediate those conversations a lot over the last few years, and it's created a lot of sort of unique insight into both sides and the motivations of them. And
Yeah.
so for those of you out there that are listening or struggling with, how do I handle this conflict, or how do I deal with that? I think you're dead on right. It's like, put yourself in the shoes of the other person on the other side of the table. What are their goals? What are they trying to figure out here? What are they really trying to say with that feedback, or with that, or that perceived slight? You think that you deserve more money. Okay, well, what are they dealing with on the other side of that? Do they have a budget issue, or do they have a boss's boss somewhere who says, no, we're not going to spend any money on this, and they're just trying to squeak a little bit out so that they can prove a point? Like, understanding where they're coming from, it really, really helps to get you both on the same page. I always, we're in this together. This is a team effort. If a client hires me to do something, they want me to succeed, because they're spending their time, energy, effort, money, all of that stuff, and they're putting it into me. They're not out there trying to undermine me or make me look bad. In fact, it's the opposite. If I sign a statement of work with a client, that client's name and reputation, that person who hired me, their name and reputation within that company is at stake too. So, you want to look at it from that perspective too. And like, yeah, they're trusting me here. And then maybe, am I working to build more trust, or am I working to tear that trust down? And maybe that helps you to understand, their perspective and where they're coming from. Sometimes, of course, people are jerks, and that's just life. That's the other part of it. Like,
yeah, that happens. But yeah, more times than not, I always kind of think about the phrase, like, everyone's going through something right now. So if you're meeting somebody like, man, that client was really a jerk today and they're harsh on me, then it's like, maybe give them a little bit of space and think, like, they could have had a flat tire on the way. Maybe their kid's sick, maybe whatever. Maybe they work 80 hours a week and get paid for 40, which is probably the case for a lot of the clients to work with. And so I think it at least come into the conversation thinking the best of somebody until they prove you otherwise. And that's kind of how I try to approach most of those conversations. But yeah, I think I think all of us, again, we're all going through humanity together. So we should all work together in all senses. And I think a lot of those situations when someone hires you, it behooves them to see you succeed. They don't want to tear you down.
Yeah, companies are not in the business of wasting their budget just to make someone look bad. Like, that's not
right. Hopefully not.
It's not the goal of any business. The goal of a business is to make money, and so every dollar that they invest, they want to see success out of that dollar. So, well, with all that said, it's time for us to welcome David Baldwin to the chat. We're going to spend some time on an interview with him. And Maari, I'll let you introduce David, because you have worked with and for David on occasions, and now he's served as a mentor for you since you've started on companies. Really great guy.
Yes. I've known David since I was probably 22, and he has seen all versions of me. I would say he is really great at understanding how to help you navigate conflicts, how to help you navigate situations, because he's been in a lot of them. He's the founder of Baldwin, an amazing award-winning ad agency. He is a creative through and through, but also just a really great human and amazing thinker. So let's welcome David Baldwin to the conversation.
Yeah, I kind of think of conflict as a blessing in a way, because it's always a learning opportunity for both sides. Because essentially, conflict is just a power struggle. That's all it is. It's a power struggle where two people have two different points of view, and there's a hierarchy to who gets to say, but that doesn't really matter if, for instance, if you're an overbearing boss and you have an employee, you can tell them what to do, but they'll leave, So essentially, you're wasting the learning opportunity. And so I know for me, what I would try to, let's use Maari as an example. She was working for two creative directors that were hard. They were hard to work with. They were hard on her. And I had to support them, and I had to support her and her partner. And I did the best I could to sort of mediate, but also try to promote them talking to each other versus running to dad, Because the truth is, so many times, especially creative people, they run to dad and go, hey, this person's an asshole. And I'm like, well, you should be having the conversation with the asshole. And if that doesn't get resolved, then you both come to me and say, hey, we've got to figure this out. How can we resolve this? And so I always tried to put it back into the person having the issue with support and advice, but say like, you need to have that problem. I had a guy that used to work for me years ago, really talented guy and a really nice guy too. But he would constantly complain about working with different partners, constantly, to the point where I just said, all right, come with me. And I would walk into the office of the person he was complaining about and go, this person thinks this about you, and they just said this to me about you, and they think you're really difficult to work with. Figure it out. And I would shut the door and leave. Because it wasn't mine to fix until it was mine to fix. And at that point, when someone's just running to you complaining about everybody, what's the point? I mean, you're not going to fix it. What do? Go tell the other person, stop being an asshole? They can't see their behavior. I've talked to Maari about this. I have this thing called SBI that I learned in my management training, which is situation behavior impact. Situation behavior impact is a way to have a conversation that is fantastic. And it's great for managing up, down, and to the side. And what you do is you say you're in a meeting and somebody says something hurtful or something mean or whatever, that's not supporting the team or whatever. You pull them aside the next day, or it's great to do it immediately, like out after the meeting. But you relay the situation literally. You say, in this meeting, it was halfway through, you said this, and you're not paraphrasing, you're saying you said this. And then you say to them, so that situation, that's the behavior. Then you say, the impact is, let me tell you how that made me feel. That made me feel like I don't have a cohesive team. That made me feel like I'm not being clear on the goals here. That made me feel that I'm going to have upset people around me that I have to figure out how to put together. But you make it about you. You make it about the impact on you. And when you do that, it helps people see their behavior, because you're not going, you are an asshole. Because the first thing that anyone's going to do, if you call them an asshole or if you ascribe intent to them, is they're going to push back against that. They're not going to be able to hear that. They're going to go, I wasn't being an asshole. I was just telling the truth. Or I saw that, whatever it is, versus going like, I really feel like I don't have a cohesive team. They're like, oh God, I'm so sorry. I did not mean that to happen. I was just trying to blah, 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 blah. And so now you're having a productive conversation around what happened that didn't put blame on them for something that they can't see. It just allows them to see their behavior. So I think for me, that's a tool that I've used a million times.
Yeah.
I will send it to you. I have a little email written up of that I've sent a million people that have talked about, like, I can't work with my boss, or, my kids know all about this. Like my kids and my wife, we use it all the time on each other. So
I feel like that would be really good to use as family stuff too. Because one of the things I've realized, and I'm an older creative now, but especially when you're starting out general in a situation, even a situation where maybe you feel kind of vulnerable, I've noticed like tendency to jump to the emotional result of what actually the factual thing that happened. And so I've tried to be a lot better about, one of my friends mentioned this too, it's like name what the facts are and then what the result of that is based on your emotion, as opposed to saying like, I'm pissed, blah, and then trying to back into it. And I found like that's a really good way, because you're framing it up as like, this happened and everyone can kind of agree to the truth of this happening. And then this is how I felt about it. And I think that's a really smart way to approach that kind of situation. And what you mentioned about how everybody's kind of coming to a situation where they're in conflict with each believe different sides. John said something to me pretty early on, and I have this like cemented in my brain as a good lesson on conflict, where it's like, what do you do if you get in a situation where you're 100% right and they're 100% right? Like, what's the next course of action? Like, how do you move forward from that situation?
Yeah, I think at some point someone has to say, and someone has to be a decider and make a decision that might be wrong. It might not be 100% right. It might be 80% right and the other person's 70% right, and you just don't know. And that's where you just have to make calls as a leader in a company and you say, hey, this is how I see it, and you explain it and say, this is why we're doing it and this is what we're doing. All they can do is go, well, I can't wait till I'm the boss and I'll tell you, you asshole,
And you're like, yeah, call me.
I saw this guy who was kind of a conflict expert years ago, because I've had a lot of management training, and he had this whole thing of like, never argue from opinion ever. And it was lay out the facts and let the person fill in the logical blank conclusion. So for an instance, his example was, you see some guy and you go, hey, you hear about Mike? And they go, yeah, Mike. You go, no, Mike's an asshole. And they go, whoa, no, whoa, I love Mike. Mike's a good guy. Versus, going to them and go, hey, did you hear what happened with Mike? What? Mike left his pregnant wife who has cancer and just left her. He just left her to her own devices and he's now shacking up with someone else. What does the person say? What an asshole.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so it's an extreme example of letting somebody, laying out the facts, just putting the facts out there and letting somebody go, oh, ooh. So I would say when you're in the 100% right situation, the decider has to lay out the facts and try to let the person see why they're making the decision. And hopefully go, oh, you're right. I think you're right about that. But your facts might not be right. It's all so mushy,
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a thing with clients where, I don't know who said it, but it really always struck me. And it's the day you win a piece of business, you start to lose it. It might be 10 years, it might be 15 years, but you start to have this sort of relationship bank account, and you're putting money in it and you're taking money out of it, based on what needs to get done. And there's a point at which it hits zero, where there's no more money in that account. And I've been there a bunch of times with clients that I value, clients who've hired me back again, where you're just on a situation where the organization isn't there. You can't get the organization to go where you think it needs to go. And so the client ends up smelling that out, or they're just tired of telling you what to do, or they're, why do I have to tell you what to do? Like, and it's, it's just we've all been there a million times, with clients.
And I feel like with clients too, what I've kind of realized over the last several years is that my most successful client relationships are when I enter in it knowing that we're just a bunch of like kind of bumbling humans trying to do work together. And sometimes I'm not assigning like a negative to it. I'm not saying like you're a bad client. I mean, there are some clients that are difficult to work with, but it's not like it's a wrong and a right. It's just like we're working together, and sometimes things will work together for like 3 years or 2 years or whatever. And sometimes they just don't. And that's okay. And that's like separating and kind of moving past it and not assigning blame to either side. It's just like we're all trying to work together. And it's like you said, sometimes things align and sometimes they kind of break apart.
Yeah, totally. I've definitely had clients who I had conflict with who are still dear, dear friends of mine. And we just work through it. But I've also had once you get into the conflict conversation, you have to have a communication conversation where you're like, where's the breakdown? Like, where's the breakdown here? Can you help? You sit with the client and say, where's the breakdown? It could be me or it could be you, but like, let's right now try to see if we can, describe and articulate the breakdown so that we can fix it, Because so many times you get like a client with a structure underneath them that doesn't even agree with what they want to do. And so your day-to-day is pushing back on what the boss wants to do. And then when everything gets to the boss, they're like, I don't want to do that. Like, what are you guys doing? Like, I told you 3 months to do this, like this was the direction. And that happens all the time, So you have to kind of figure out how to kind of prescribe a solution.
You think that communication is probably like the primary source of conflict when we talk about like client and
I think it's
company
everything.
or client and agency relationships?
I think it's everything. Communication is everything.
Yeah.
Especially, there's always an agenda in the client's company that's unspoken. And there's always an agenda in the agency that's unspoken. And that is trying to get the right thing done that's going to solve the problem. And sometimes you see the problem differently, or sometimes the CMO sees the problem exactly like you do, but the CEO doesn't, And you can see the train light, like the light's coming at you. The oncoming train is, you're like, I can see this coming. I just read what he said to the analyst, and he is not talking the same as what we're doing, You just see it all the time, So, but I do think communication is everything.
To follow up on that a little bit, if you're the freelancer or the agency in that situation, and you believe that the misalignment in communication is coming from within your client's organization, so let's say the C-suite versus the director that you're talking to or whatever. Is it helpful for you to name that? Or as the freelancer, I might be a little apprehensive to do that and sort of say like, hey, I think the breakdown is happening over here with this. Is it helpful to go ahead and name that? Or are there other ways that we can uncover it to help them discover it for themselves?
I think you have to get good at kind of sussing out where the decision-making and power is in a relationship. I've had clients who they only want to know what I think. And I've had clients that really turn out they don't really want to know what you think. They want you to do what they want you to do. And I think as a freelancer in particular, you need to develop that. That's a muscle. And you need to develop the muscle that says, this is a client they're going to hold my pen and they're going to tell me what to do, or it's going to be in the middle, or they really want to know what I think. But at the end of the day, whoever has the money has the say. And so as a freelancer, sometimes I think the issue is you're working for an agency, that agency is working for the client, and that agency doesn't always see what the client needs, or the client hasn't communicated it clearly. And now the freelancer just gets run over, because they're like, I have 700 changes for you, and I don't agree, the personal say, I don't agree with them, but we have to do it, and it's like, you've got to develop that muscle.
Yeah.
I think as a freelancer in particular.
And I feel like a lot of our freelancers have one of the benefits, I think, of running your own business and learning that, and I didn't see that when I was in the agency world, was I didn't understand the business side of that world. Yeah. And I've had conversations with several people who, are definitely, it's a bummer that they don't do more business within the art schools, because I think that's such a disservice, because you come out and you're like, I'm a creative, I'm doing art stuff. And then I don't understand the implications on a business side of what I'm doing. And not that you're necessarily held accountable, but I do feel like it's like you have a better understanding of what you're producing and why. And so now, like running a business, as a lot of our freelancers do, I feel like they have a better idea of the effects of what they're creating to the client's P&L sheet and what they're putting out there. And I think that's like a real huge benefit, because, when you have a client who's like, I just want to hold your pen, sometimes you just go, I get it. Yes, you need to do that and get it done. And I'm here to do that for you.
And that's actually going to be good for me, because I don't fully understand what's being asked, or I don't understand the whys. Why are you asking me to do this? Just tell me what to do. I would say this though, like, I think one of the most magic things for me was when we worked on Burt's Bees, the generosity of that team to let me in to sit in their leadership team meetings, which they let me in like a number of times, where I would just go sit and watch, like, this guy's got this concern that he's been tasked to do something. I would have had no idea, So the guy, Rob Bennett, fantastic, like, let me in. Mariah Eckhart let me in. Jim Geike, they let me in. And there's more of them. And John Replogle too. They let me sit in there and listen. Mm-hmm. And I would just sit and listen. I mean, I would offer every once in a while, I'd offer sort of a thought, but I just was like, I'm going to watch the way a marketing team works. And then when I became the CMO of the brewery, when we started Ponysaurus, and I was like, oh, I'm on that side of the table now, and my agency is my agency. And so I have other partners that I have to please. And I have the agency that we had very strong sort of ethic around what we thought we should be doing as well. And it was really fascinating to sort of just be on that side of the table. But I credit the Burt's Bees team in particular with letting me go, I walked into that. Had I just walked into that being a creative director, we would have made a lot of mistakes, So, because it would have just been like, let's just do something cool. That's it. That's all we're going to do. Something cool. Yeah. Versus, hey, we have to get this done. What's a creative solution to get that done? And then that was magic. I mean, we did so much great stuff, tackling actual problems.
Well, it's kind of like in those situations, you're getting inside before the conflicts even come up, because you can see, okay, if we did this, like, that would create a conflict, that would create an issue, because the inside part of it. And I think part of the time when we talk to freelancers too, it's like, we like to highlight how important it is just to be empathetic and to be understanding, because it's super easy for a full-timer to be like, they don't understand me. They're out there doing their whole freelancing, bouncing around. They have no worries. They're in their sweatpants and, sitting out at the park doing stuff. And here I am locked into this office. And on the flip side, the freelancers, it's like when they go freelance, they completely forget a regular 40-hour-a-week job. And so then the conflict comes down to, like, they're not getting back to me. And the other one's like, they're expecting me to respond all the time. And we try to remind them to live on both sides and just to, like, sit and listen and understand, like, this person over here is probably working 60 hours a week. They're overworked, underpaid. They're doing 5 people's jobs, and all you need to do is communicate, and you need to understand where they're coming from. And it's like, that really opens up the whole communication to be so much smoother.
Yeah. If I was freelancing on something, I would soft demand being in meetings, at least listening in. I just would like to listen in to whatever, especially if I'm freelancing and there's a team presenting work and presenting my work. I would request, can I just listen? I won't say anything. I just want to listen in. Let me just listen to it, because you'll hear everything. You go, the agency's not listening to them, or, they haven't diagnosed the right problem, or what. You'll see it,
Yeah.
and then you'll be able to get to a solution quicker, and then you can even advise them on, what needs to happen. So, but I don't know if that's an option for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I'm at a point where I would write that in. I would say, you have to let me hear what's going on,
I think what you're getting at too is, as you get to sit in those meetings and listen, you're not just listening for the job that they're hiring you for, but you're listening for the business problems that they're trying to solve. And so it's like, that's sort of the originator of why you're hiring out these other things. So if the issue is, revenue's down, okay, why is revenue down? Well, revenue's down because we're not getting enough leads. Well, not getting enough leads, how? Where are they coming from? Are they not good qualified leads? What is a qualified lead? You keep going down that. From your perspective, being the fly on the wall, you start to learn and understand that. But if somebody just calls me up and says like, "Hey, John, I want you to build me an infographic." Okay, cool. Okay, and these are the things that I want on it. Okay, great. And I want it to look sort of like this and use our brand. But you might not understand the reason why they need the infographic or why they think they need the infographic. Maybe they don't even need it.
Yeah, they might have read an article saying you should use infographics.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So then the question becomes, like, what's the business problem that you're trying to solve here? And to me, a lot of the conflicts that happen in our world with freelancers, or the difference between creatives and the business people or the sales people or whatever, a lot of it comes down to people don't understand the problem, the real problem, the actual thing. What is it that we're trying to do? We have angry customers. Oh, that's a real problem. How do we fix that? Well, not with an infographic, right? So to me, that's kind of what you're describing there by being that fly on the wall. And you're right. Not a lot of people get to sit in on that room, but also I would argue not a lot of people ask to sit in that room.
I think you're right. Yeah. I know freelancers where I'm like, do you want to be on this call? And they're like, no, I'm going to go, I've got another thing, or I'm going to go walk my dog, or, you tell me what happens. And it's like, okay. And if you want, you can listen. Yeah. I think there's been a transference of expertise too, where they're doing now for the most part. And agencies, this is a real generalization, but in the 70s into the 80s, it'd be the clients were as knowledgeable as the agencies about creative marketing. I'm not talking about marketing because clients knew marketing, but there was a time in the 60s and the 70s where the great work that you were saying was agencies were leading. They were leading the insights. They were leading the business problems. They were, going in and diagnosing what the problems were, and then coming up with amazing solutions. And there were essentially 7 or 8 media channels, and they were experts at it. And clients started to, which is, ended up being in like clients with in-house agencies that are better than the agencies. I mean, you look at what Apple's doing versus what Mal is doing, and you've got 2 of the best agencies in the world, I think, doing some of the best work in the world. And one's in-house and one's, the Chiat spinoff. And that wasn't the case in the 60s and 70s as much. I mean, there certainly were. I'm not saying it's a tricky thing because it's a generalization, but I used to watch agencies go, they should do what we tell them. And I'm like, why? You don't know their business. You don't know their business problems. Like what? Mm-hmm. Like, what are you talking about? You don't know what they're trying to do. Like especially younger creative people where they're just like, I used to have a really great writer who would just tell me, can I curse?
Yes, you're good.
Yeah.
You would just say, we need to tell the client to fuck off and do it. And I'm like, yeah, that always works. It's a surefire way to get this thing sold, my friend. It's like your job is to come back with something better. Your job is to listen and turn that into something better. There's always another and a better idea, but that kind of thing, you get it beaten out of you, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like, so. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I feel like I loved my time in the agency, but I would get frustrated when I would get a brief and it was like, we need to do $1 million TV spot. And I was like, I remember when we did for Sony and I was like, this product is going to die in 6 months. Like, it's just a dying product. Like, let's not spend this money on doing this awesome thing. That would be so fun. Like, we should do something, So I do, the business side of it is really smart, and it's moving so quickly. And there's so many more media channels that just with the fact that there's so many moving parts, like, issues and communication stuff is like even more essential than it ever has been.
Yeah. I know exactly the product you're talking about.
I didn't want to speak it.
And it did die 6 months.
So I'd run when the iPhone came out, right? Yeah. I think that like a month later.
Yeah.
I was thinking about when you mentioned like the guy who was like, let's just tell them to fuck off. And my kids are going to be like, Mom, you can't say that because they've never heard me say that word. Yeah, but is if,
Apologies.
I mean, I've been in a few situations where something did happen and there was a client conflict or a misspoken or too many half-hour drinks in front of the client on a shoot. And then there's some damage control. Like, what is your experience in helping like the creative or helping people like navigate how to recover? Just part of what we're talking about this month too is like, there's the before, the like, let's try not to have a conflict. There's the conflict and how to get through the situation. And then there's the recovery and how to like repair if at all possible. So like, what are your suggestions and what have you seen as far as people having to navigate that repair and like backtrack situation?
I think it goes back to John's point about communication. I always came from this, and you may have heard me say it, but I would say it to clients and I would say it to account people and I would say it to leadership. Creative people are supposed to be a little crazy. Like, we're not supposed to be normal. Like, you don't hire us to be normal. You hire us because we have a point of view, and that point of view has come from experience, and that experience might be way different than yours. And that experience has led us to be able to do things you can't do. And so I always kind of came from, you need to ask the question as an agency, is your creative department a resource or a force? You know, is it the force? Is it the engine? Or is it a resource that you go tell what to do? If you want a creative department, you just tell them what to do. That's a broken system in my mind. It might be a very profitable system for the agency, but it's very dissatisfying. You know, it's unsatisfying to creative people. So they'll leave. Then you just got constant churn and all that stuff. When I worked at an agency in New York, one of the art directors had sex in the pool with like one of the account people in front of the client. We're having a gathering out, having drinking at the pool. And one of the art directors had sex with and so that was a major scandal that we had to, I was just a writer. I didn't have to deal with it, but the agency had to deal with it. And I have a feeling that was the conversation was, yeah, they went too far and that was a little crazy. And, you know, but yeah, that happened. I watched the situation happen because I wasn't there, but everybody was talking about it like, oh my God, this happened. And, you know, you're like, okay, we're going to lose this client.
Yeah, there's some stories I've heard that it's like hard to believe that actually happens in those situations. But, you know, I mean, everyone's people. And John and I talk about this too. It's like, when we get into situations, nothing like that with our clients.
That's over the top.
Or a freelance. That's very like 90s, 2000 advertising. But like, I feel like when we get into a situation or one of our freelancers get in a situation, I'm like, just own it. Like, and yes, you're a huge proponent of this, David, is like, take ownership. Like, I messed up. Like, I shouldn't have done that. I read this wrong. I reacted. I was in an emotional state. I'm really sorry. I apologize. You taught me this. It's like, name what you did. If you need to own up to it, and then move on. Like, don't keep bringing it up. Don't make it a 4-paragraph email. Like, if it's something that's bad, say it in person or as much as you can.
Yeah.
But own it and then move on. And I think that's like such a good advice because especially when we're in a conflict, you know, depending on how you are, like, I'm a people pleaser. I could like just, you know, put myself over and over and over and over again with that mistake for all time. Yeah. And that never like heals the relationship. It's a constant reminder of the mistake. And so if you have a relationship with a client that you want to keep going and you want to keep working with them and you made a mistake, own it, name it, apologize, move on, and don't do it again, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think that's really solid advice to not dwell on it forever.
Well, it's going to have the impact it's going to have. And, you know, to your point, people are people. And if it's unrecoverable, it's unrecoverable. Trying to avoid it is just going to make it worse, you know? Mm-hmm. I think that the main thing comes down to, do you have a system of integrity? And by integrity, I mean doing what you say you're going to do and understanding that if you say you'll do something, you've made a promise to do it. And so now if you don't do it, you broke a promise. And so setting things in cement like that, I wrote a thing on my Substack. I wrote one about the situation behavior impact, and I wrote one about just the idea of requests and promises. And the request is, hey, I need you to do this by this time. And you say, okay, I'll have it done. And if that doesn't happen, you are not living in integrity in any way. Mm-hmm. And so when you don't live in integrity, and especially as a leader, if you don't live in integrity, nobody takes you seriously for anything, and especially clients. And so you have to constantly manage those problems. And if you know you're not going to have something by 10 a.m., you have to call them and go, I'm not going to have it by 10 a.m., but I will have it by 11, or I can have it at 10 if you don't want to do this thing. You know what I mean? You just manage you manage the promise. But looking at every single thing that comes out of your mouth as either a request or a promise will clean up 95% of your issues, because you can then have a conversation with that person and say, you said you would do this and you didn't. And the answer is not like, well, I will. No, it's like, you said you would do it and you didn't, and that's kind of an easy black and white thing of like, you said you'd have it and you didn't have it. Or, again, manage it. So I've ran my business that way. I've tried to run my life that way. I've tried to run my family that way. Like, if I told you, my kids constantly will go, hey, Dad, I have a request. I mean, they'll use that word, and I'll be like, yeah, we can do that, or I'll say, nope, we can't, whatever it is. But it's like, once I say we're going to do it, we're doing it. Or once they say they're going to do something, they have to do it. And they know that, So, and it's not a wrath thing. It's why didn't you do it? You said you would, And I'm at a point where if I don't do what I say I'm going to do, I get my stomach hurts, Like, I mean, the dumbest things, like I'll be like, oh, I said I would have this thing that I was going to send you the lyrics to this song and I didn't do it. I will like literally go like, oh, I feel terrible, like, so even small things, like I just have that. It's been harder since I retired because I don't have anybody managing my calendar. So but it's made it more like, oh, I really got to get a hold of that,
Yeah, I love that. Well, and I think if you hold yourself to that level, not that you need to give yourself a stomachache, but if you hold yourself to that level, then you're holding the clients that you're working with, or if you're working with subcontractors or other staff, you're holding them to that level too, maybe in an unspoken way. But I do feel like when you work with people who have that level of integrity, you kind of step up, you kind of rise up to that level. Yeah. And I think, that's the reason why it's like you live it, you speak it and you live it, which is sometimes hard to find a lot of times.
Well, the speech that I would give a lot of new employees is, I would say we don't have any fireable offenses other than you not doing what you said you're going to do. That's the problem. Like, you're not going to ever get in trouble for being like, I need to come in at 11 because I have a dentist appointment. Like, you're never going to get in trouble for that shit. But if you're like a serial avoider of your promises, of keeping your promises, you couldn't work at the agency. We couldn't make it work. And I would just go like, I'm sorry, you're not right for this culture. You're causing speed bumps everywhere by this behavior goes everywhere when you do that. Like, you're affecting 10 other people, And so I always made that really clear. So
when people say that they hate conflict, what do you think they're actually afraid of?
I think it's power struggle. I think they're afraid of losing agency in a relationship. I think they can't see beyond their short-term goals, and they don't want to acknowledge that they are in a power struggle. And that power struggle is, I'm not in charge here. I have to do what I'm told. And I think a lot of that is it exposes character and integrity, And I'm including myself in that. I've had major screw ups where I to Maari's point, I always try to own it. But I just think people are not trained in delivery. Like, they're trained in their craft, but not in their delivery and promises, And I think if we just teach people to live their promises, like it all goes away, Now, you're going to work with people who are assholes. And I have come to see that as a gift. At the time it was hard. And I had and I came to my last 10 years to see it as a gift and to tell people, like, this is a gift. This is a growing opportunity for you to deal with. But I worked with really difficult people sometimes, and I learned to confront it with the situation, behavior, impact stuff, and it changed my life. I mean, it really changed my whole orientation around conflict, where you're like, oh, like you think of conflict sometimes as we're going to have a come to Jesus, high noon, 6 guns in the street conversation. You're like, actually, no, you just need to have a conversation. That's all it is. It's just, here's a conversation of telling what your behavior, how that made me feel. That's it. I mean, that's pretty easy, It takes the emotion out of it. It takes the anxiety and emotion out of it,
Yeah. We'll be more objective.
Yeah.
So we've got situation, behavior, impact. We've got own it. That was sort of Maari's, right? Like, I'm going to own what. And then integrity. I think if we were going to wrap this whole thing up, it would be sort of all of that combined. Do what you say you're going to do, own it, situation, behavior, impact.
Well, and also looking at everything that comes out of your mouth as a promise.
Yeah. That's like, that's a good thing to pass along. I mean, I have 2 kids, and we talk a lot about, owning what you got to do. If you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it, and don't do it halfway, because that freaking drives me crazy. It's like one of our core values is the Yoda, there is no try, because I'm like, if you're just going to do it, sail 1,000%. Like, don't half-ass anything, because it's a waste of your energy and a waste of mine. And that's a big thing too, is like, if you're going to do it, do it. If you fall short, that's fine. But like, go all the way.
Yep.
Love it.
Yeah. All right. Let's get to the lightning round. So I know this is challenging for everyone, including us, and that is to like ask a question and then answer it in a succinct fashion. Okay. I'm going to challenge you to see if you can do it. Here we go. So do you think anyone actually enjoys conflict?
Yes.
Yes. Oh,
how's that?
That's pretty good.
I know people who love it. I know people who operate on chaos.
Yeah.
All right. How should you prepare for a conflict conversation if you know one's coming up?
You write down some behavior impact, you write it down. You cannot wing it. You have to absolutely pre-plan the conversation. You have to write down the situation exactly as it happened. You have to write the behavior exactly as it happened, put it in time. At 3:30, we're in this meeting situation, behavior, this is what you said, this is what you did, this is what you delivered. Here's how that makes me feel. And you write it down and you stick to the script, because what often happens is if you just try to wing it, you'll go, you said this and you're an asshole, and suddenly you've done the exact opposite of what you should have done with that conversation. So I would say prepare for it.
Nice. All right. A last one. What can you learn from watching other people react to conflict?
Well, you see where they are as people. You see how kind of complete they are in their integrity and in their self-awareness. And, emotional intelligence is very quickly sussed out when somebody deals with adversity and conflict, where you can, I've known people who like have zero ability to see their own behavior. They just cannot see it. And it's not their fault. They can't see it. Like, they're not wired to see it, And so you have to help them see it. You have to somehow help them see it. So, yeah, I think that's the thing you learn is, what gap do I have to fill as a leader or as a person in this relationship? What gap do I need to fill that's going to fix this pothole? Because they're not capable of fixing the pothole. Someone's got to fix it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, David. We really, really appreciate it. I'm
a big fan of you guys.
Stay.
You have the cool business model. I love it.
Thank you so much. All right.
Thank
Talk to
you.
soon.
Bye.
All right. Well, that's all for today. Thanks again to David for all of his wisdom. You can find David in many places, actually, at Pony Source, which is an award-winning brewery in Raleigh and Durham that he helped to co-found. Checking in on his agency that he helped to start, Baldwin, or creating music with his group, the Gumbies. So check him out. Until next time, this is Maari.
John.
And we're reminding you that quitters can win and winners can quit.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute medical, legal, or financial advice. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the guest's own and do not necessarily represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Command Q or Uncompany.